Good evening, everyone. I think this is the first time we've had more on Zoom than in the room, but because I think there's at least, how many we have out there, Bob?
13.
Okay, 13 on Zoom. And those of us in the room, we welcome everyone to the 8th and final session in our quarterly series on Catholic social teaching in action. I'm Doug Thompson with the St. Francis Pathways for Justice Ministry. Let's begin tonight by acknowledging those whose lands on which we are gathered. You're welcome to join reading it on back of the agenda. We acknowledge that we gather this evening on the traditional lands of the Nisenan, Papuan, Algonquin, Siouan, and Iroquoian peoples. We recognize and thank the indigenous stewards of this land, past, present, and future. With God's help, we agree to hold ourselves accountable to forming new and ongoing relationships of honor and respect with these lands and peoples. And continuing with the opening prayer from Dr. King. God, help us as individuals and as a world to hear it now before it is too late. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and God's justice, and all these other things shall be added unto you. Make us willing to do your will, come what may. Increase the number of persons of goodwill and moral sensitivity. Give us renewed confidence in nonviolence and the way of love as taught by Christ. Amen. I'd like to also pause in silence to remember those who are suffering in the wars of our times, in particular the many thousands of civilians who have perished this year in Gaza and in Sudan. Thank you. Many of us are grieving the tremendous cost of life and the ongoing anguish in Palestine, Israel. Pope Francis gathered the Israeli and Palestinian ambassadors to the Vatican Gardens last Friday to pray together for an end to the war in Gaza. Since we met last, the Franciscan Action Network has joined Catholic groups like Mary Knoll and Pax Christi to circulate a letter imploring for a ceasefire. The letter is followed by nearly 80 pages of signatures, including several previous pastors of this parish. There are a couple copies on each table, and you can add your own signature if you wish by going to the Franciscan Action Network website. A few other handouts to mention related to our discussion tonight. There is a list of 61 forms of voter suppression. This from the Transformative Justice Coalition. There is a list of the California Legislative Black Caucus bills related to reparations. And Sister Ann has provided an equally sacred checklist for voters from Network. And there are also some handouts from Simone. Those did not get mailed ahead to the Zoom folks, but we will send them after the meeting. So you'll get those as well. I think the Zoom folks should have received the other handouts already. Also wanted to point out that Betsy has assembled a listing of local events in celebration of the upcoming Juneteenth National Independence Holiday. You may have picked that up as you came in. That, of course, commemorates the end of slavery in the U.S. when the Emancipation Proclamation was enforced in Texas after the end of the Civil War. Lots of nice things to plug in locally, and we thank Betsy for assembling that handout. By way of housekeeping, for anyone not familiar with this space, restrooms are just up the stairs there. All are welcome to partake of refreshments in the back at any time, and thank you to those who brought them. I want to welcome Ms. Simone Braithwaite from the Office of Assemblymember Kevin McCarty. Our other presenter tonight, Sister Ann Pratt, is joining us by Zoom. Sister Ann is unable to be here in person tonight as she is with family in Minnesota following the recent death of her brother. We thank Sister Ann for making this time available during this period of loss for her family. We also welcome several guests tonight from other parishes and churches. Folks are in the room from St. Anthony in the Pocket, love to say that. Also St. Ignatius. I know folks are online from Divine Savior Parish in Orangevale. There may be folks as well from Trinity Cathedral, from St. Peter and Paul Church in Rockland, and St. Joseph in Auburn. So if I missed your church, my apology, and thank you for joining us. St. Francis is a number of parishes who've come together to form a group called the Parish Advocates for Racial Justice, which seeks to fulfill the vision of Bishop Soto's 2021 pastoral letter titled, "It is Right and Just, Journeying from Racism to Communion in Christ." The group is planning an event in November, so look for more information on that later. I want to acknowledge Bob McCoy here, who's had the idea for this quarterly series and guided us through each of the 8 sessions. The first session was 21 months ago when Brother Mark Schroeder came back to St. Francis to give us an introduction to Catholic social teaching. He called it our best kept secret. In preparing for tonight, I went back to watch some of what Brother Mark told us as we began the series, because the sessions are all on the St. Francis YouTube page. Brother Mark told us of 4 steps to take in becoming practitioners of the Church's social teaching. He said we must begin with gratitude, giving thanks to God and God's creation, the people and the world around us. Next, he said we need to honor the pain, to know the pain not only in our own lives, but the pain that surrounds us in our communities and our world. Next, see with new eyes. See with new eyes the world in which we live and the people we encounter. And then go forward, go out to do the work we are called to by our faith to do. We conclude our series on Catholic social teaching in action tonight within the principle of rights and responsibilities. If we look back at the handout on the seven principles of Catholic social teaching that you may have picked up as you came in, the summary under rights and responsibilities reads, the Catholic tradition teaches that human dignity can be protected and a healthy community can be achieved only if human rights are protected and responsibilities are met. Therefore, each person has a fundamental right to life and a right to those things required for human decency. Corresponding to these rights are duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, and to the larger society. So that, of course, covers a lot of ground. It's very broad. Sister Ann tells me it's really the basis from which other principles flow. And she'll tell us more tonight about protecting human rights and human dignity. We knew in thinking about this tonight, this event tonight, we couldn't cover the full breadth of actions required to live out this teaching in one evening's discussion. So as the Pathways group considered a focus for rights and responsibilities, we thought about several things. We thought about living as Americans during this election year. We thought about living in an era of retrenchment with attempts in many states to move away from the gains of the civil rights movement, including voting rights. We also thought about our roles as citizens of a state that is trying to take more seriously the enduring impacts of slavery, of racial terror, of Jim Crow segregation, and the generational poverty that these have spawned. California is considering some initial forms of reparation, and we'll hear more about that later from Simone. First, some further context. We started tonight by acknowledging that we live on lands taken away without reparation for the indigenous peoples that many of our forebears displaced. The actions and doctrines of our church, we must acknowledge, justified the taking away of lands, and also justified the system of slavery put in place to build new economies on those lands. In the current century, the church has at last repudiated the doctrine of discovery and has renounced the statements of earlier popes on slavery as not consistent with church teaching. You may recall that last year, Pope Francis also made what he called a penitential pilgrimage to Canada. He apologized to Indigenous survivors of residential schools and admitted that church actions had genocidal impact. So as Catholics, we may bear a particular responsibility for addressing wrongs as well as affirming rights. In our church, there are theological and catechetical bases for making reparations. Repair of a broken relationship with God is the reason for the sacrament of reconciliation, after all. As Christians, we further recognize that what we do unto our neighbors, we do unto God. So we're also called to repair our injuries to God's people. Reparation is an act of going beyond apologies, though it's important to start there. The Church Catechism says in paragraph 1459, and I quote, "Many sins wrong our neighbor. One must do what is possible in order to repair the harm. Simple justice requires as much." End of quote. So to explore these topics further, let me now introduce, direct from Mountain, Minnesota, Sister Ann Pratt. Sister Ann is a Dominican sister of Racine, Wisconsin, and a member of this parish. She holds master's degrees in social work and moral theology, and leads the justice team for her religious community and facilitates their advocacy actions related to social justice issues of our times. Welcome, sister.
Thank you, Doug. And I'm glad to see all of you here, both virtually and in the room. It is heartening to me to know that people care enough about this to come and learn more about it. I'm going to share my screen with you. So as Doug mentioned in his comments, the foundation for Catholic social teaching really comes from the particular principle that we're looking at tonight about rights and responsibility. And what underlies all of the principles of Catholic social teaching is this respect for human dignity. And all the principles of Catholic social teaching are based on the truth of human dignity. Being created in God's image means that with God's help, we can be like God and glorify God with our thoughts and our actions and our words. In his encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis went on to explore this idea about human dignity and its place among Catholic social teaching. And he says in this that the world exists for everyone because all of us were born with the same dignity. Differences of color, religion, talent, place of birth, or residence, and so many other ways cannot be used to justify the privileges of some over the rights of all. And in many ways, this principle of Catholic social teaching is really a guide, I think, for us within the Catholic tradition help us of other people. Communities of both men and women religious carry out their responsibility regarding rights and responsibility. And I'm going to talk about this really from two perspectives, one from voting and the other from the concept of reparations. During Vatican II, all of the men's and women's religious communities were own way of being in the world in light of the signs of the time. And since that time, doing the work of justice has become a major priority for many religious communities. And communities carry out these rights and responsibilities in different ways. Sometimes individual communities take actions. Sometimes communities join with other religious communities to take action. Sometimes communities join with the whole of the church to really take these actions. And so tonight we're going to look at some examples of how this happens in from different aspects of how religious communities take action on behalf of this Catholic social teaching principle, and more importantly, on the behalf of human. Our first, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. told us that voting is the most powerful instrument ever devised by human beings for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison people because they are different from each other. We would add to that voting is one of the ways that we can help advance the human dignity of individuals. My own Racine Dominican community, a statement, and this is an example of how women's religious communities, men's religious communities sometimes put their voice out there in the public. And in this particular instance, I'm just going to quote from the end of that statement that we put out in 2022, but we said that the Racine Dominican Sisters and Associates believe that the right to vote is the cornerstone of have a fair and equal opportunity to exercise that right. We will continue our work, the we being the Racine Dominicans, to ensure that voting is accessible to all American voters, support laws that make sure our elections are free and fair, and encourage leaders to enact measures that ensure votes are counted correctly and
Sister Ann, can you hear me? Sister Ann, can you hear me?
Transparent. I can.
Okay. We're going to suggest you turn off your video because we're getting your audio is breaking up and we think that will help.
Okay.
So just turn off your camera and of course, we'll keep your screen up, your slides. So we want your audio, but not your video. There we go.
I got it.
Yeah.
Now we lost that.
Now you gotta share your screen again.
You should still be able to share the screen.
Yeah, go ahead and share your screen again.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
Doug, is that better?
So far, so good. Yeah. we'll
Okay.
Keep it that way for now.
So if you go to the website of any men's or women's religious communities, you're likely to find these kinds of justice-oriented statements. And they're often shared on social media, they're put in newsletters, but they're a very public way for communities to share how their particular perspective regarding how they intend to carry out their responsibilities related to a particular issue. Another way for communities to put into action their rights and responsibilities is through cooperative efforts. And within women's religious communities, states, we have the Leadership Conference for Women Religious, and some of you may be aware of that. The Leadership Conference is it's an association which represents all of the congregations nearly all of the congregations of Catholic women in the United States. Basically, it represents about 67% of the congregations of the 35,000 women religious in the United States. So when when the leaders work together to make statements or take actions, they're pretty powerful because they have a lot of people behind them. This year, between November, it started in November of 2023 and going through November of 2024, the Leadership Conference of Women Religious is employing the lens of the way that we want to approach the 2024 U.S. national election campaign. This particular initiative is called Transforming Grace, the Work of Transformative Justice. And basically, this is a response to the very divisive and partisan issues that we are seeing arise during this particular campaign. And this transforming contemplation and conversation and listening to one another. And if the challenges that we have in this country are trying to help one another be able to talk and to listen to each other and learn from one another. And so the hope is that this particular process that all of the congregations that belong to the Leadership Conference of Women Religious have agreed to, that's really the goal of that, to help make that happen. And there's a website down here at the bottom of this slide, and I'll put it in. If you're interested in learning more about the Transforming Grace initiative, that's where you would go to learn about it. And basically, it's following the liturgical seasons, and there are weekly and monthly reflections, short videos, some brief readings, some questions for discussions, and the materials are really designed to be used by groups, but can be used by pairs, or really in any way that people would find them helpful as they gather. But and each session is set up to be about 60 to 75 minutes. But during that reflective process, the hope is that it will give people the opportunity to begin to see things from other people's perspective and move them beyond just their own perspective. Another issue or another campaign that's going on this year that is led by women religious, and many of you are probably very familiar with Network Lobby, network by a group of about 50 women religious who gathered in Washington, D.C. and basically laid the foundation for what became Network Lobby. From that small beginning in 1972, this Catholic Sisters Network has grown into a faith-based political advocacy organization that really fights for the dignity of human persons and the common good. And basically, Network brings together tens of thousands of justice seekers throughout the United States. And this goes well beyond women religious. It certainly includes men religious and secular and other groups across the country. During this current year election cycle, as Doug mentioned in his introduction, Network Lobby checklist. And this is really a campaign that is trying to help people move beyond kind of the one voter issue to realizing that this is really to be informed and effective voters, that we need to really look from a multi-issue voter perspective. And so this equally sacred checklist is really based on the understanding that Pope Francis has about that we need to move. Life can be protected in many ways because issues are equally sacred. So he says that we cannot uphold an ideal of holiness that would ignore injustice in the world. And when we don't look from that lens of the multi-vote issue voter, we have a tendency to really ignore some of the injustices that are happening in the world. The Equally Sacred campaign looks at issues that are related to being healthy, living on a healthy planet, participating in democracy, caring for ourselves and our families, being free from harm, and living in a welcoming country. Probably got the website for the Equally Sacred checklist, and as Doug said, you got them as handouts tonight. You also can go to this link and print them off there, and I will also put that in the chat when I'm finished speaking. But this campaign is really intended particularly to be a preparatory resource for Catholics as they are thinking about voting and discerning and trying to figure out how they can balance the importance of the different issues in a way that really values the dignity and the human rights of each individual person. This particular campaign also gives you, when you go on the Network Lobby website, it also gives you the opportunity to sign up as a Pope Francis voter by taking the voter pledge. And again, the idea behind this is to help Network be able to educate other people that there are lots of people that understand the very sacred importance of being multi-issue voters. So we're going to move on from the voting examples to some of the reparation examples. Reparations are a particular issue in the Catholic Church because we have a history of responsibility that has become associated with the 15th century. Unfortunately became the first global institution to declare that Black lives did not matter, and that led to the enslavement of people. And while Catholic social teaching affirms the right to life and dignity of every person, the fact remains that the Church egregiously violated these teachings through its participation in the transatlantic slave trade and imperial practices of the African slavery and segregation in the Americas and in Europe and in Africa. And not only did we participate in that, but the beliefs behind the doctrine of discovery got very intertwined in throughout the world. And so it took on kind of a life of its own. I think in Doug's opening comments, he referenced the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and the Catechism actually addresses the issue of reparations and says that every offense committed against justice and truth entails the duty of reparation, even if its author has been forgiven. When it is impossible publicly to make reparation for a wrong, it must be made secretly. If someone who has suffered harm cannot be directly compensated, he must be given moral satisfaction in the name of charity. This reparation, moral and sometimes material, must be evaluated in terms of the extent of the damage inflicted. It obliges conscience, which basically means that this is something not that we can just choose to as practicing Catholics. Some actions have been taken by religious communities to right these wrongs. And although the actions that have been taken are very important, much more is, of course, needed to be able to really right these wrongs. But again, the Leadership Conference of Women Religious really helped women's religious communities to be out in the forefront of this issue regarding reparations. In 2020, the National Board of LCWR unanimously affirmed a call to place the conference on a 5-year to address. The call emerged from an open and honest discussion that LCWR had with the leaders of the women's religious communities and the National Black Sisters Conference. And this work really goes to the heart of remembering about who we are and whose we are, just as servant of God Thea Bowman called us to. And that it really speaks to the integrity of the Conference of Religious Leaders. In August of 2021, LCWR took another step. And in this picture, you see Sister Jane Herb, who was the president-elect of LCWR in 2021, and Sister Elsie Garcia, who was the current president in 2021. And they led the entire LCWR leadership who was gathered for their annual assembly and asking for forgiveness for racism in religious life, including a formal acknowledgement and apology for the crimes and of colonialization, genocide, and slavery. This was a particularly poignant moment because so much of the Catholic Church has refused to acknowledge any of these actions in a public way. And this moment when the conference took this stance, it was really a prophetic leadership, modeling to the rest of the church community what is really possible and what is needed. The men's community have also attempted to take actions regarding reparations. The Society of Jesus, we also know them as the Jesuits, took some very definite steps in this direction. And this is based on their own history. From the 16th to the 18th century, the Jesuits and the Catholic Church were among the largest slaveholding institutions in America. And in 1938, in order to save Georgetown University from financial ruin, the Jesuits sold more than 272 enslaved people from their 5 Maryland plantations. Some of these enslaved individuals, and this included women, men, children, and infants, were literally torn from their families and sold to plantation owners in southern Louisiana and held as collateral by the Citizens Bank, which is now J.P. Morgan Chase, of New Orleans between 1838 and 1865. The story got lost to history, and it wasn't really until 2004 when one of the descendants of this Georgetown action, Patricia Bayonne Johnson, uncovered the history while she was researching her family's history. And since that time, the Georgetown Memory Project and the Jesuits have identified already 10,000 descendants of those 272 men, women, and children that were sold. Some of these descendants formed the GU 272 descendant. September 20th, 2019, the GU 272 Descendants Association, the president of the Jesuit Conference in the United States, and the U.S. provincials signed a joint memorandum of understanding, which you see here in the slide, to establish a $1 billion irrevocable trust and a Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. And the purpose of this really is to work to address, to heal the wounds that the betrayal of human dignity and the millions of others like it that have occurred in America before and since. Georgetown continues to be engaged in a long-term and ongoing process to more deeply understand and respond to the university's role in this injustice of slavery and the legacies of enslavement and segregation in our nation. Through engagement with the members of the descendant community, collaborative projects and new initiatives and learning and research has taken place. And the university is pursuing a path of memorializing and reconciliation for our present day. Again, this is a poignant action on their part, but is particularly poignant because of the hesitancy of the church to publicly acknowledge its role in slavery and its need to be publicly involved in reparations. So the Catholic tradition teaches that human dignity can be protected and healthy communities can be achieved only if human rights are protected and responsibilities are met. And therefore, all of us have a fundamental right to life and a right to those things required for human decency. Corresponding to these rights are duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, and to the larger society. Doug?
Thank you, Sister Ann. We turn now to restorative efforts for human dignity being considered by our state. And the efforts related to reparations here. So Simone Braithwaite is here to tell us about that effort. Ms. Braithwaite is the communications director in the office of local state assembly member Kevin McCarty. Simone has a BA in broadcast journalism from CSU Northridge and a master's in strategic communications from National University. She worked in journalism in Texas and in Oregon before returning to California to work in state government. Simone is committed to using her expertise to inform, inspire, and affect positive change, and we're pleased that she could join us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk about reparations and what's being done at the state level. And it's great to know that these conversations are being had because they're very important conversations. So I know you guys have all heard about the reparations task force. And so that came about in September of 2020 through the bill AB 3121, and that was enacted by then Assembly member, but now our state secretary, Weber, Dr. Shirley Weber. And so basically that created a task force on reparations, on how we can reverse the harms that slavery has had on Black families. And so last summer, the task force came out with over 100 recommendations. I know that's a lot, but very important. These recommendations are very important to reverse those harms of slavery. And in January, the California Legislative Black Caucus introduced their reparations package that begins to tackle those recommendations. So now, since there are more than 100, this is just the beginning. This is just year one. This will be a multi-year effort to make sure that these harms are reversed and that future generations of Black families are able to thrive and survive for life to come. And so, yeah, so I said this is a multi-year, fight. And so with the CLBC package, there are about 14 bills that are included in this package, and you guys do have a handout of those bills. I will make sure that I was looking at some, and some might not be accurate, so I will make sure to connect with Doug to get the accurate list, just to confirm, and then so that way he can distribute that to you all. So I'll make sure to do that tomorrow. In addition,
That will be updating us on the status of the bill.
right, the status of the bills. Because although I do work in the legislature, I am in communications, and sometimes for me it's a little difficult to figure out which bill is where and all that fun stuff. So in addition to these 14 bills, there are legislators who have other bills that are not included in this package that are in lines with those recommendations. So even though we have the 14 that the CLBC they're focusing on, there are, about maybe 30, bills to tackle this. And so I want to talk about right now, I'm gonna jump, instead of talking about my boss is Assemblymember Kevin McCarty, and he does have a bill that's a part of the package. But first I want to talk about the apology, because I feel like with anything, we can't start anything, we can't move on for something unless there is acknowledgement of harm being done. And so Assemblymember Reggie Jones Sawyer, he has a bill, AB 3089, that you know, requires, basically it gives California the chance to confront the tough truths of the harms of slavery, and then to give a formal apology of that. And so even though California has entered the union as a free state, really, you know, every branch of government has had a hand in perpetuating the oppression of Black people. That came from, I know you guys know redlining, what redlining is, through redlining, through lack of education, educational resources, through mass incarceration with a 3-strike rule, and how that has been detrimental to Black families. The war on drugs, the effects of that, the lack of housing available, blighted neighborhoods. A lot of neighborhoods live near freeways, which gives off exhaust, and then that causes health issues for kids. I grew up with asthma. You know, it's kind of just what happens, and also the lack of jobs. So things, and also more importantly, injustice in our criminal system, the treatment of police and everything. And so those things, even though those are not actual like slavery, they're harmful. And that's just because of the mentality of slavery, of how Black people were inferior. So therefore they don't deserve education resources. They don't deserve, you know, to have housing in good neighborhoods and things like that. We don't deserve to treat them as humans. So that all plays a line in it. And so it is long past time for the state to acknowledge its role and responsibility for the atrocities that promoted and facilitated the institution of slavery. And so the state of California should continue to affirm its role in protecting and uplifting the descendants of enslaved people who have been harmed by the legacy of state-sanctioned policies. And so that's really what that bill does. It's just the state formally apologize of the state's, you know, hand in slavery, even though California wasn't a slave state. And so with so that's one bill that's really important. I think that's really the starting point of everything. And
So I have a question.
yes.
So if that bill, I see it pass the assembly and it's in the Senate currently. Oh, sorry, do I have to? Okay. Oh,
Can you hear me?
oh, yes, okay.
So I see it's passed the assembly and now it's in a committee in the Senate.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, if it should pass and the governor sign it, not what does it mean, but what is this, is there gonna be some kind of, I know it's supposed to be a formal apology, but is there gonna be not like a plaque or,
Right, like
I mean, you know what?
Yes, let me just grab this. So yes, there will be a permanent public access of an apology in the California State Capitol building and in the state archive. So it will be known, archived. State of California is apologizing for their role in slavery and the harms of slavery. So yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And with that, I want to talk about my Assemblymember McCarty's bill, which is basically giving equitable career pathways. Sorry, it's a lot. But my member has been a champion for education, making it accessible for everyone. He definitely believes that education and just, you know, not going into a path of crime really starts at the beginning of the educational level, which is transitional kindergarten. And so his bill basically would give school districts that qualify for the equity multiplier funding positive consideration when applying for career technical education grants. and a little bit more about the equitable multiplier funding, just so that way you guys have an kind of just a background of it. So basically in the school, there's this funding called the local control funding formula, and that was created to help low-income students with resources to succeed in schools. Because we know low-income schools, they don't have the best books, they don't, I mean, teachers do the best that they can, but sometimes, you know, you have teachers who maybe don't necessarily care too much, staff that don't really care too much about the kids because they just see them as their situation. But with that local control funding, there were still, Black students were still falling through the cracks. So the legislature created the equity multiplier fund. So that way to help Black students get the resources that they need to make sure they're not falling through the cracks through that local control fund. So this bill will basically, schools that qualify for that will get positive consideration, which means they'll get first dibs when they apply for CTE grants. And so just a little bit about CTE, does everybody know what? Perfect. So basically it's career technical education, and it's the practice of teaching skills-based careers to students. So basically that's like when you do plumbing or construction, instead of going to college, they would go to the do CTE, and instead of getting a degree, they would get a certificate, and it kind of fast tracks them to their career. But you can still go to college for that. And you can do nursing programs for CTE, engineering for CTE. And it's really a good option. Sometimes I feel like people who go to CTE earn more money than people who go to college, because you get those skills without having to pay, you know, college tuition fees. So it's really a great option, but you can still go to college with it. So it's an alternative, but you can still go to college doing that. But when it comes to CTE, the access to quality programs, especially in STEM, which is the nursing, the engineering, it's not always equitable. Black students in particular have been regularly excluded from high quality CTE programs. And in the reparations task force, they found that expanding access to higher quality programs for Black students would be a vital step in minimizing the separate but equal education. So that's one of the recommendations, and it's just really important. And so when Assemblymember McCarty, so with bills, it goes to committee and you present your bill and it gets voted on. And so when you do that, you're often allowed to have someone to testify in support. Usually it's an expert on the issue that can say, this bill is really good because of X, Y, and Z. And so when our bill came up, we had someone, his name is Dr. Troy Williams, who is the Chief Impact Officer with the Sacramento Greater Urban League, who testified for this bill. And he said something really great that I just wanted to highlight. He said, traditionally, these types of programs that focus on STEM remain in predominantly white communities. If a person is able to get access to an engineering track, it can completely change their economic trajectory for their entire family as well. So these types of opportunities really have a great opportunity to uplift the community economically. And it's just really simple, just having access to these really great programs. And that's pretty much, I feel like, the sense of the reparation bills. It's just providing access, resources to really important programs, whether it's medical resources, food resources, because we all know about food deserts, to really help, you know, uplift the Black community, because those were the things that slavery was just very harmful, that still affects us today. And so, you know, a lot of people ask, you know, why is this important? You know, slavery ended hundreds of years ago. Like, how are we still affected? But it's important because I feel like if we uplift, like help one community, it really helps us all in a sense. When we think about homelessness, you know, a lot of homeless people are, you know, Black people. It's high. So if we, you know, tackle homelessness, if we focus on that, we're tackling homelessness as a whole, you know? So it's just, once we, you know, help Black American, it really helps us all the issues that, you know, are dear to our heart, which is, you know, food and homelessness, you know, it's all intertwined, you know, so it really affects us all. And my one thing is just how to support it, which is really good for you guys, and this is great that we're having these conversations, how to support. The first thing I would say is just to read the task report. Now, it's really long, but read the summary. The executive summary will give you really a great breakdown of the harms of slavery, like different specific categories. So you can get a real breakdown of like, oh, wow, I didn't, you know, that's harmful. It's really great. It says it's 75 pages, but it's mostly the citations. So don't let that scare you. A lot of pages are citations. There's pictures in there. There is elevated text. So it's not really that bad. I was told about 15 pages, but it's really great. It's really eye-opening. And I really encourage you guys to read it and pass that along to your guys' network, friends. And then another part is really under kind of staying up to date on the bills. When is a bill being heard? How can you support, so you can show your support, whether it's physically as a Me Too, and a Me Too is just going up when they're asking for supporters and say, you know, my name is so-and-so and I support, you know, so the people these legislators who are voting on these bills can physically see like, oh my goodness, there's so many people who are in favor of this bill, you know, this is really important. Also, you can write letters of support. That's really big. You can get your friends to write letters of support. You guys can write a letter of support as a whole, individually. That would be really good. And most importantly, just talking to people about why reparations is important. If we can talk about it, if this is why it's important, then other people can be like, oh, yes. And then they can spread the word. I think that's really important. It's just talking about it, really emphasizing how this really uplifts all of us, in a sense, and that, you know, we need to support. Yeah. That's it.
Thank you, Simone. And I just had one question about AB 3131,
Mhm.
the Assembly Members Bill. Does it still use boundaries related to historically redlined communities in deciding, you know, where to focus the financial aid?
So not necessarily, only because of gentrification, a lot of those communities are not considered to be redlined. And so that's really hard to track. So it's easier, and we're able to reach more people and help more students by focusing on school districts who qualify for that multiplier equity funding. Mhm.
Thank you. And let's open it up to questions in the room and on Zoom. Terry.
I have another question. So, you had said. I was hoping I forgot. That's when people on Zoom can hear.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the CTE program.
Yes.
And how that would increase access for students.
Mhm.
So I wanted to know if, and you may not be able to answer this question, because what I find is in some of those programs, especially like engineering, nursing, especially, is the matrix that they use to admit students. It will deter students of color.
Mm.
Because they look at testing,
Mhm.
which doesn't really, you know, some students, you know,
Mhm.
some students are great, getting good grades and doing well in tests, and they suck at talking to patients, because I taught them. So we found that I was part of a research team that looked at holistic admissions.
Mhm.
So I guess my question is, has the assembly members, looked at that, and I don't know, but encourage programs to look at holistic admissions, because when you change the metrics, it really does help those students.
Yeah, I'm not for sure, but that is a very good point. And the staffer who works on this bill, I will definitely mention that to her to see. I would assume because it's giving school districts in low income, areas the first chance to accept the CTE grants. So my thoughts would be that it would could just have them be accepted because of that alone. But I will definitely double check that with our staffer just to see. That's a really good point to make. Yeah.
Any other questions in the room right now? And I know Bob just sent out a note inviting the Zoom folks.
So I'm just wondering, how are you getting this to the community so they are aware to apply for the grant?
Well, we need the bill to pass first. And then it would be for school districts. So once the bill gets signed, by the governor, school districts will know about it. And then, yeah, because it's not necessarily for individual people.
I meant to know.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so the school districts will know, and then that they have this opportunity, and I would hope that they would jump on it.
Yes, to follow up there. And you said once the bill is signed by the governor, so we hope it gets there. And when I look at the status, it seems like most of the bills have passed their house of origin and they're being heard in the other house. And can you give us a general sense of the prognosis for this package this year? Do we expect most of them to get to the governor?
I think we're all hopeful that it'll get to the governor. And I think it would just depend on each individual bill. I wouldn't know overall. But we're hopeful that, I like to be positive, so I'm saying it's gonna get to the governor's office and be signed. But I wouldn't know the prognosis of each. They're being heard right now in Senate committees. So the process is going and it's moving. And we're just positive and hopeful that they'll follow.
Hence the need to offer support.
Right, hence the need to offer support, to talk about it in your community groups and to your friends, and to write letters and show support. And also, if you, there is a way, the assembly has a website to where you can watch live committees. So if there is a bill that, you really like and want to keep track of, you can always watch live, of the bill being heard and what's being said about it.
You probably mentioned before I got in here, what,
Joanne?
the assembly, Kevin McCarthy, what district is this?
Yeah, so it's District 6, which includes most of Sacramento, I believe Citrus Heights, yeah,
Oh, okay.
Fair Oaks.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you.
My question is, has a group of the Black Caucus actually looked at all these bills and rated the top priority to make sure that that's what they're, propelling forth the top ones, since you mentioned there's quite a few bills?
So the ones listed are their
They're the
equal,
top.
yeah, those are the 14
And is
equally.
it in the order of priority?
No, usually it's just we generally list everything up numerically in order. And then it's just there's no order of what's first is the top. They're all equally considered top. That's just how it's listed. Yeah.
I didn't want to take up Zoom, if somebody on Zoom had a question. Okay. Gee, I thought I was on the mic. But it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. So while these are all bills on reparations, I think it's important for us to keep in mind that there are bills that are being presented that kind of go against some of the things you're speaking on. For example, they're trying to roll back some of the things that were in Prop 47 that affect the community that you're talking about. So if you roll that back and take all those benefits away, it kind of puts us back at square one. So while this is great, I just think, you know, the fight is we can't lose sight of the fact that some of the things that we fought for before, they're trying to take away. So that's number one. Number two is there was, I don't remember the bill, but I'm part of a group who's doing things on housing, and you mentioned homelessness. So because the budget was supposed to give so many millions for housing, low income housing, to refit buildings that were kind of falling down, you know, to make it so that families, again, the community we're discussing, so that they could have housing, and they're trying to take that. They're trying not to pass that. So we have to look at it kind of at both, you know, both sides. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.
I have a question. I don't, this might pick me up. Simone, you had mentioned that one of the things that we can do is to contact the assembly member's office, for example. What's more effective? 20 emails or 20 emails saying the same thing, or one email with 20 signatures on it?
Very good question. Because sometimes the volume kind of, you know, it's like, wow, we're getting all of these, you know, emails or calls. It shows the weight of, you know, physically the importance sometimes compared to getting one email, even though it's 20 people. That's a very good question. The one, I would say the one, only because I've been on that receiving end, so I think one would be, with everybody's signature would be fine too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions for Sister Ann, or any questions out there on Zoom?
No questions on Zoom yet.
I have a question for Sister Ann.
Sister Ann, are you still available?
I am.
Hold on. That's all. Okay, I'm sorry. Sister Ann, try again, please.
Yes, I am.
Great.
Hey, Sister Ann, it was just so inspiring to hear what all of the women religious and men's religious communities are doing. And I'm just, what you talked about network, and I'm just wondering, how can we in the parishes lift up what you all are doing to finally convince our diocese, our various parishes, that they need to do what the religious men and religious women organizations are, you know, leading the way, and how can we encourage our communities to do the same?
Thank you, Betsy. I think that we have to do things like you're doing here tonight. You're giving people this opportunity to come together and to hear this information. I think this whole series has really been this opportunity to help people better understand kind of the church's, where the church is called to in terms of justice. And I think that the more that at the parish level, people are made aware of and really encouraged to use their own voices, that they and then take the opportunity to come together, then that kind of action will have an influence on the larger church. I think that once people become aware of that people are really concerned about these issues and want the church to respond to them, that it increases the likelihood that they will. I think that, and of course, you know that the synod is my favorite topic, but I think that the whole synodal process that's going on right now is exactly the kind of environment in which these kinds of issues can be raised up from the congregation and be brought into focus for the leadership of the church.
Another question for you.
Another question, to Sister Ann. So recently, I had a family medical emergency and I had to live in Pennsylvania for a month, as my mother was recovering from hip surgery with my father. And, I frequented the churches there in a kind of a conservative area. And I was really taken aback because I'm a huge proponent of the Care for Creation ministry at Pope Francis. And I was startled by some of the pastors that I encountered and had a conversation with regarding Laudato Si. And so my question is, have you had those encounters, and how do you respond when someone does not embrace Pope Francis's message of, that we're all interconnected?
Thank you for your question, and I certainly feel your pain. I think maybe Pope Francis has helped us lead the way in this. He knew 10 years ago when he wrote Laudato Si that it was going to be a very, very slow process, and that over time we would increase the number of people who are involved. It seems hard to understand in some ways, given just some of the ongoing events that we're experiencing, that people still do not believe that this is an issue. But even in our own diocese, it has not really taken hold very strongly. But I think that those of us who because Laudato Si really is not simply an environmental document. Laudato Si is truly about how the economic and political systems play out in so many ways of truly removing human dignity from people. And so I think that we have to continue over time to raise these issues up. And I know that in California, the Laudato Si movement right now is working on developing a Laudato Si chapter for the state of California specifically, so that we can bring that issue into focus better for parishes. I don't know if that helps, but it's a hard path to take.
My only comment, I don't know if anyone can hear me, but is that this parish, one of the parishes in Pennsylvania that I attended mass and I refused to go back the following Sunday. Is over 3,000 families are not even getting the message of Pope Francis's Laudato Si, and that was what was very, very sad. And all I said to that pastor was, you know, I don't understand why you don't embrace Pope Francis's message, but I just told him I would be praying for him in his conversion of heart. Because he just talked about my number one problem is communism, and I feel that that's the bigger issue. Communism. And I was so startled that I just didn't even know I was just dumbfounded. And then you know, like I said, I chose a different church to attend the following Sunday. But I was disheartened that there's so many people in areas probably around the country. It just made me open my eyes to realize there's so many people not even getting his messaging because pastors have made that choice on their own.
Well, and you know, next year is the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, and it's also the you know, every 25 years there's a Jubilee year. And next 2025 will be a Jubilee year. And I from the context that I've been having among the Laudato Si people is that this is going to be you know, the Laudato Si message is going to be a very, very centerpiece of the Jubilee messages that are going to be, you know, going out. You know, Jubilee is that, you know, that time when there's forgiveness and there's, you know, embracing and trying to really create an environment that is more in liking to what God envisions for us. And so I was encouraged to think that a very central part of this upcoming Jubilee year is going to be very focused on the message not only of Laudato Si, but of course the follow-up messages from Laudato Deum, which you know, Pope Francis kind of took the gloves off there and kind of laid it on the line in terms of what's going on. But it's I guess that, you know, we're grateful for the number of people that actually are participating, and it is hopeful. You know, Catholic Climate Covenant just gave out, I think, $1,000 grants to people throughout the United States. And, you know, it was a very stiff competition. So there certainly are people out there that care about this, maybe not at the level of the church that we would like, but I think that people are beginning to understand how important it is to pay attention to these issues.
Thank you, Sister Ann, and thank you, Simone, for your
We have another question.
oh, thank you.
I'm not sure how to make this question, but I think a couple of years ago, there were 2 books that were published about slavery in the Catholic Church. And one book argued that the Catholic Church has always been against slavery. And the second book was written by a Jesuit, Chris Kellerman, and he wrote that the Catholic Church was always for slavery up until 1888, after Brazil, the last country in the Western Hemisphere, ruled against it. So and the book that said that church has always been against slavery has really outsold the other book. So how can we do to educate ourselves on the church's history with slavery?
Sister Ann, you want to take that one?
You know, I think the the very best place to start regarding the church in relationship to slavery is really if you look at the whole history of the doctrine of discovery. And there is a lot of information out there about the doctrine of discovery. And you know, it's hard to ignore exactly how much damage that particular way of thinking, how insidious it became to decision making at such high levels. And you know, we can say that we were against slavery, but when you look at the factual history, that is not going to stand up, because that isn't what the factual history shows. But I do believe that if you want to really gain hold of kind of where the church went with that, you know, if you look at the doctrine of discovery and its path through history, it gives you a lot of information, not only about slavery, but of course also about the unconscionable actions that we took towards indigenous people across the world.
Thank you, sister. Thank you, Cliff, for the question. And it's 8:30, so I think we need to wrap up. I'd like to close in prayer, and that was a prayer on the back of your agenda. Another prayer from Dr. King. One of his close associates was a man who was a tremendous apostle of nonviolence, always drew the connections between racism, sexism, militarism, a real architect of the civil rights movement. That was the Reverend Dr. James Lawson. He died this past Sunday at the age of 95. So I'd like to hold aloft the memory of Reverend Lawson as we finish tonight in prayer. Eternal God, we thank you for your church, founded upon your word, that challenges us to do more than sing and pray, but go out and work as though the very answer to our prayers depended on us and not upon you. Help us to realize that humanity was created to shine like the stars and live on through all eternity. Keep us, we pray, in perfect peace. Help us to walk together, pray together, sing together, and live together until that day when all God's children will rejoice in one common stand of humanity. In the name of our Lord and of our God, we pray. Amen. Thanks to all who attended tonight. Thank you to Simone, and thank you to Sister Ann for taking us through this discussion. And I wanted to ask Betsy if she could have one other little item for us tonight. And just, we want to express a note of appreciation.
Oh, yeah, well, number one, all of those glasses, cups that you've been using, you can compost them. So please take them with you and either reuse them or put them in your compost. But we have a special thank you for someone who, it would not have been possible to do the Catholic social teaching series without this person. And we asked his wife, what would he like us to give him? And she said, well, either Mexican food or a house plant. And she said, I think a house plant. So everybody in the room and on Zoom and everybody who's ever attended one of these, the person who's most responsible is Bob McCoy. And we just wanted to give you this plant and this little thank you.
Make him get on camera.
Oh, yeah, on camera. Oh.
There we go.
Ta-da.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
And thank you to the,
Go back.
yeah.
They want a picture.
Oh, yeah,
That's right. From the bulls.
that's for the bulletin.
Oh, wait,
You
my
cover-
fingers are.
There you go.
Okay. Okay. One more. Oh, shoot. Got
Well, and of course, I extend that warm thank you to all of the members of the Catholic Social Teaching in Action Subcommittee, as well as the members of Pathways and their spouses who repeatedly show up and support us. So thank you so much. Thank you, brother.
Everyone have a safe trip home.
Turn in your evaluation.